lived experience leaders cohort member. So I myself am coming up with a project, and I'm going to need to go through a lot of the processes that we're going to talk about today, as well as things that'll be covered in a lot of the following workshops in the next month. So I am here to talk about websites and brand design because that is what I do. I am a graphic designer, and I'm the co-owner of Treedome Productions, which is a studio in town. I make websites, I make print material, you name it. I came from an advertising background, so I worked with some bigger clients like Gunderson and Ramsey County, but also I worked for Midwest Music Fest and the Winona Chamber of Commerce. So a lot of local brands, a lot of small businesses are kind of my go-to clients. They're the people I enjoy working with the most. So, and I'm gonna, yeah.
Is it my turn?
There's some dinging, but.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Knouft, and I am currently the co-owner of Ed's No Name Bar, or No Name Bar, in downtown Winona. I've been doing web development for over 20 years. I started out in design and moved into user experience and programming, front-end programming, which is the presentation side of the website. And I've also done some back-end programming, which means I worked with databases and connecting the, the presentation side of the website to the back-end database. I lived in Los Angeles, and I worked at a bunch of different startups there before branching out in my own in 2013. I had a company called Freya Digital, and we worked with some ad agencies out in Los Angeles. We had a number of high-profile clients, just like Maggie. We had Benefit Cosmetics, Quiznos, Arby's, and AVA Colorado Rafting. I'm here to just help you get started with website design. It can be a little website development. It can be a bit overwhelming if you're just getting into it. There's a lot of information out there, and just here with Maggie to help you, help walk you through it.
Yeah, and for that reason, we actually made a site for this presentation. So I'm going to put that in the chat. And for folks who are seeing a recording, we'll just request that that link gets sent to you so you can follow along. But I'm also going to screen share this now so that you can see what we're talking about here. As mentioned, Cynthia and I have a lot of experience in this, so we are available to you beyond this presentation. We're really here to help facilitate some of the projects that are getting developed into, really high-end brands and community projects that are seen as, a big value to our community. So based on that visual representation. So here we go. The website that I'm currently on is actually made on Wix. So you're going to notice it has a crazy URL. That is not normal. We'll get to talking about that, but I'm using the free branch of Wix for this site that I made in just one day. So crazy as it seems, this is a pretty big site, but it's really that easy. And so some of the things that are on this website we're going to walk through is how to use style to inform your brand, making a simple website just like this one. And then we've provided a list of resources to guide you in your work as you create your website. So I'm going to scroll up and we're going to navigate over to Style Informs Brand. So like I mentioned, I'm a designer, and so the visual aspect of websites is really where I'm at home, and it's the thing that I really value because design is visual storytelling. So great design will tell a story better than something that's really not thought out, and it's going to speak better to your audience if you have a story to tell. So design is creating systems of communication, just try and explain to your audience in the most concise way what you do and what your mission is. So to start out this conversation about branding, if you have your own project in mind, I want you to think about a few questions kind of as we talk about this. And then when we step away, maybe go back and look at some of these questions again for your project. So I always start with these questions when I'm working with a brand or starting my own project, which is something I do a lot. What makes your project or business unique? And do you have a vision and a mission statement established for that project? Then how do you want to be seen, and who is your target audience, which is something we're going to get into today. And then what do you actually need to communicate? Because we all know there's a million social media accounts you can sign up for, but is LinkedIn the right one? Is Instagram the right one? Do you need an email campaign? All of those materials are things you need to think about. So when we talk about branding, I also associate the word style with branding. And style is more of a visual language that is associated with your overall brand, okay? So some of the things that I associate with styling are your social media posts, how you actually talk about your project in person, the vibe of your brand, if you will. What kind of audiences you are reaching or who you seek to reach, the photo styling, and the brands that are associated with you and the ones that are not. Those all kind of encompass the different stylings that you want associated with your brand. And once you kind of have an idea of some of the things that make up your style, then we get into your brand, which is actually the physical components that are associated with your material. And obviously this is including your website, your logo, the colors associated with your brand, fonts, iconography or illustration. The name can have a huge impact, the tagline, and then if you have additional language that's consistent, all of those things can be directly associated with your brand. Now, I'm not going to sit here and, show you a bunch of good brands. Like, we all know that FedEx and Amazon and Target, they're all like clever brands, right? Their logos have something in them that's unique. And those are brands that have existed for a very long time and haven't changed. So what I really want to do is talk a little bit more about how did they get there? How do we get there for our smaller projects? And that really starts with your audience. Your audience is a huge component about what your material should look like, what it says. There's so many different things to think about with your audience. So I'm going to let Cynthia kind of talk a little bit about that, and then I'll show you some examples.
Sure. Specifically with your audience, when you think about website design, you want to think about who are you targeting? Who do you want to be the ultimate audience for your website? Are you looking, if you're an artist, are you looking to promote your work for galleries? Stuff like that. The other thing that you want to consider is how do you want your audience to use your website? Is it informational only? Are you looking to engage your audience? Are you, as Maggie mentioned earlier, do you want a mailing list? So these are the things that you're going to want to think about when you're planning your website. Who is the audience and how do you want them to use the site?
Absolutely. And I've added some examples here that you can look at that are, related to specific conceptual brands, right? So an athletic shoes company. Okay, well, this brand, their key demographics are in the ages of 18 to 29, primarily male, wants to look stylish, but doesn't like to follow trends. Some of the challenges with this person is finding athletic footwear that's both stylish and comfortable. So you want to associate all of these different categories. So key demographics, what they want to look like or whatever, the challenges that you might face with that kind of client, and then what they do, how they ingest media. You want to consider that with who you're talking about, right? So a credit union, right, is going to have a totally different demographic. So we've put up a few examples here, but something that I really like to do when thinking about my audience is think about a persona. And a persona is literally giving a name to one of these people, right? So like this organic protein person could be called Jane, and Jane's 18 and Jane likes, to go running. And you can literally start creating a little journey for a fictional person, so that you kind of understand. Now it may seem super obvious, and I think like both of us can agree, like we all think we know what the demographics for certain things are, but your website can have a massive, massive impact on that. So my example is actually a church, but churches are such a good example because if you really think about them, they want to reach all people, right? And a young person in this example is going to resonate probably more with this website than with this website. And you can say that's self-explanatory, but it's really not. Some of the reasons I would associate a young family with this is because children are at the forefront of the design, and they're using what we call kind of like modern graphics. Things that are trendy are flat graphics that don't have a lot of like depth. That's very trendy right now and considered modern. They don't have a huge color palette. There's a lot of things, and I have the link in here if you want to check out this website. Also, they have an Instagram, so there's that. Whereas these other churches, they've probably been around for 50 years, but maybe they're not, maybe their goal isn't actually to reach young people. We don't know. But if that is their goal, they're not being successful, right? These kind of graphics are really dated, in my opinion. And dated is a word we use a lot for, websites that are developed on older software or haven't been updated in a certain number of years or aren't following even the tiniest bit of trend, right? So that being said, there's certain things you need for your brand, and like, how are you going to develop that and establish what all of that looks like? I listed these things before, but to be blunt, like, ask for help. I don't want to like just boost us up, but talking to a designer, talking to a creative is the best thing you can do. Even if you're just having a consult with somebody to look at your material, look at your logo, look at some of the stuff you've come up with, it's going to help you in the long run. Like, I'm sure both of us can attest to that. You're going to get what you pay for too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure everybody here has the experience of seeing a company with a logo that's it's just a little bit off. And it doesn't sell the business or sell the product as well as it could be. You don't know exactly what it is, what's off about it, but it's just not good. And that's where a designer can really help you pinpoint the things that might be off about it that you may not even realize.
Yeah, and I think that, remember there's differences in designers too. Like asking your cousin who's a marketing specialist at a tech company to design your like organic protein bar brand may not be the best solution, because some designers are considered in-house and they only work on one thing, and others do a really big variety of things. So knowing who you're working with can also really affect how your brand turns out in the end. I'm going to list a very specific example here that I worked on recently in the last year, and I'm still working on today, and that's the Winona Area Chamber of Commerce. So this logo on the right, at the time, was a logo for like a celebration, and that's why it looks kind of celebratory. Like, yeah, it's a little cluttered. It has a little bit of a dated appearance, in my opinion, just because of some of the textures. But at the time, maybe it was great. But we really took, a hard look at it and decided that what the chamber really wanted to represent is different parts of the businesses they serve. So what I did is create a logo that had a lot of different iconography built into it. Now, this is a fairly busy logo, but based on the mood board we put together, this is kind of the style we wanted to go with, right? Having industry, having the canoe and, camping industry. We have like the staple of Winona, the bridge. We have education. We have river transport. There's just a ton of things in here, and that makes it effective because we want to represent like all of what Winona is. Now, the other thing to note about the chamber is that they're going through a website refresh. And, oh, I didn't even link it. So the current website looks like this. And just kind of take that in. Has a lot of different drop downs. This area has links to like the city, schools, higher education, media. The homepage has like some quick links that are helpful, some that aren't. And overall, there are like over 200 pages. So every time we click on something, it comes to a document or it comes to a brand new page of content. So to kind of combat that, there's a few strategies that we'll talk about when we talk about building a website that I used. But I can show you that, oh, yes, the new website is looking a little better. It looks like, wow, I don't actually have it up. Okay, hold on 1 second. So the new site, we are managing in Wix, which is totally appropriate for this situation, and we'll get into that later. And it looks a little bit like this. So we have some areas that are highlighted that are most important. We have news, we have events, we have a much more concise footer, and all of this all connects to the new branding. So it's all in the new font, it's all in the new color palette. Everything about it is much more streamlined. And it kind of has a tone that is cohesive, right? And it hasn't been launched yet, but we're in the process of going from something that looks like this to something that looks like this. And it didn't take that long, even though we had 200 pages of content to manage.
If you keep, sorry to interrupt, Maggie, but if you keep those up when we talk about web design, I can point out features between the two that show how much improved this new site is compared to the old site.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Sorry, I'm scrambling with my tabs here. So I'm gonna head on back to branding. There's just a few, I think there's just one more thing on there. We scroll down. Just another example that I just kind of really wanted to talk about is Burger King. So Burger King recently did a rebrand that I thought was really phenomenal and just kind of fascinating, right? They went from something that looked like this and, pretty cluttered logo to a logo they actually had like in the 90s. So they went back to something they already had and then they refreshed it to look totally modern. And when I say modern, like I said, flat design is trendy, showing just a lot of different potential in their products is trendy. And they have kind of used their history to inform their new brand, which I think is just very clever. So that's kind of all I have for branding. Did you have anything else, Cynthia?
I don't.
Yeah. If there's any questions about that, go ahead and speak up or put it in the chat. Again, branding can be a little elusive because it really depends on your project. So If you have any questions about who your audience may be for your specific project or business, we can talk about that as well. Okay, I don't actually, here we go. Okay, cool. If there are no questions, just put them in the chat. I don't think I can see the chat at the moment, but just let me know. I'm gonna move on, if that's cool, to the website building, which is why we're here. So really, to start, kind of what we've been saying, web design and design in general is really endless, and there is just a million possibilities. And to slow down for a minute and just think, like, you need to focus on what's best for you and what you like and what speaks to you is important, because it can get super overwhelming very, very quickly. As a creative person, I know when I spend time like pulling things I like, I start to get so overwhelmed by that I can't actually produce anything, because I'm just digesting all this material constantly for good examples and things that I want to show my clients, and it can get very overwhelming. So we've really decided to break this down into like the simplest possible steps for how to build a simple website. And all of this calls back to what you determine your brand is before you start your website. Yeah.
Okay. I think what Maggie said about pulling examples of things that you like it's a great start. But as she warned, try not to get too overwhelmed by that. But a good place is to look at sites that have features or are similar to whatever your business is or whatever your website is going to be. I might check out, a couple of sites that are similar. Like if I'm redesigning the No Name website, I might look at other bars or other restaurants that have features that I may want to include. That being said, that will help you also come up with a content sitemap. I think at once you've gathered your samples or your examples of things that you like, you should just put those aside and then focus on your own website and think, what do I want my site to include? Building a content sitemap is essentially doing an inventory of all the content that you want to include on your website. And that can be however long or short as you wish, but it's a great starting point. The second step, and we'll get into these a little bit deeper, is creating a wireframe for the structure of your pages. Basically, it's templating how you want the sections of your page to appear. Then you can start with a template on a website builder, which we'll explore later, and establish your fonts and colors that are going to speak back to your brand. You'll want to keep that as consistent as possible with the brand that you've identified for yourself. Then you can go in and create your menu bar and pages, and maybe taking some of those examples that you liked earlier and incorporating some of the features from there. At that point, you'll start placing your content and images. And when you're ready, when you feel like it's ready to go, you're going to want to test your site with some of people that you trust. And we'll talk, that's actually called user testing. So we can talk about that too. And then we'll also discuss how to purchase a domain and launch your site. So if you want to scroll down, yeah. So developing your sitemap, like I said, it's basically taking an inventory of all the content that you want on your site. You're going to list out every possible area of content that you're going to want. And in the examples below, step 1, step 2, and step 3, you can see how those have been reorganized and categorized combine those areas by about 30%. Maggie, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that really drives back to sites that either start with a lot of complex information or, you have a lot of information to go in. I like to think of 30% as a rule, so that you're still representing everything in a good hierarchy. But there's really no actual system, compress it as much as you can. But I start with 30% and then see if I can adjust even tighter.
Third would be to create a flowchart for your information. So you're going to want to think of your menu. What do you want your top level categories to be? And again, that's thinking back to the user and what kind of information are they going to want to find on your site, and how are you going to make that available to them? And then basically what you're doing is taking your content and putting it into categories. So we have step one laid out, and that is your that's all the content that you're going to want to have on your site. But how can we group that so that it's easier for a website visitor to find it? Well, step two, we can see that we have some items that could be listed under different categories. And so when you've distilled that all of the steps or all of the items in step one into step two, you find that, oh, the contact, past clients, and business history, that could be in my About Me section. What services do I offer? Well, let's take photography and videography services. What do I do? My mission and vision. And then my news section. I'll list my upcoming events. And then if somebody wants to be updated via email, they can subscribe to my mailing list. So I basically took all those 11 steps or 11 categories in step one and distilled them down into 4 main categories. And step 3 is essentially what you've found with your menu bar. That's probably what your menu bar is going to look like, with the About Me, with the drop down contacts, clients, history, services, what I do, and news.
Sure. And, there's a few ways that you can structure that in your actual site. So I thought I'd throw an example of this for the Chamber of Commerce in there. Like I said, it started with like 200 pages. And so this is where we started with a concise list of all the different areas that we were looking to have. Also, in this case, I listed the URL because the URL on the old site was all numbers. So it was like winonachamber.com/1256. We always want that URL to call back to what the name of the page is. And so from here, this is a listed sitemap. This is the flow chart of what that sitemap looks like in the menu bars. So our main menu has quite a few more categories than like a header menu, which would be kind of small, and the footer menu, which is like quick links. And we'll get into that with the examples again, but flowchart style to me is a great way to visualize that. And I know I listed a few resources on the resources page that helps you kind of draw that digitally.
Just jumping back to that chamber example with the URL, having those descriptive URLs is really going to be good for people who are trying to find your website, and how a search engine like Google categorizes that and indexes it. So we'll talk a little bit about that later, but keep that in mind as you're naming your pages. You want them to be descriptive.
Absolutely. And
the cat has joined the chat.
Come on. All that is to say, this is your, I don't know. Sorry, the cat's distraction. The layout, I don't know. I called this a layout, but in like our world, we call this wireframing. And wireframing is really like a really boiled down drawing of what your pages look like. And they can be anywhere from like super well drawn digitally to a little bit more sketch to like a notebook full of notes. And this is super important because before you start writing all your content, choosing all your images and everything, you're going to want to have an idea of what you actually need for every page. So I know that based on some of the ways this is drawn, that these are images, right? These big squares with X's in them, that's kind of a code for images. And I know that these long bars are going to be text. Sometimes I actually go the extra step to write the headers in there, so I know exactly what I need to write for that section. And these are all really random pages. Overall, you want to try to keep these templatized across the board, so they're all fairly similar. I'm going to minimize that, but.
And you'll also notice that these are not done in any kind of color or not too much detail, as Maggie said, because you want to kind of separate yourself right now from the color and the images that you want to appear on your site to just a visual representation of the information design. Like even in these, you can do quick sketches to keep kind of separate that design element from the actual architecture and the framework of your page.
Yeah, and also like this one with a phone, if you are thinking mobile first, it's good to know where, like, if you click this, it goes here. If you click this, it goes here. And so you're kind of mapping out like a journey for somebody to get to a piece of information, which I think it can be super helpful if that's kind of a part of what you are trying to do.
The next step is you want to choose what platform you want your site to be built on. So each of these 4 website builders that we've listed are actually just platforms for building your website. And I can speak more. Oh, can you still hear me? Okay, I can speak more to the WordPress aspect of it, but each of these can be, explored further. And it also depends too on if you want an e-commerce site, such as a Weebly site, if you want people to order products through your site. I know one of the restaurants in town uses Weebly for their website because you can order takeout online through them. And it's pretty easy to set up. The person that set it up has no experience with web design and just was able to put it together quickly. And it works great. WordPress is the platform that I'm most familiar with. It's been around forever, it feels like. And it's open source, so people have been able to develop plugins and extensions and themes. So it's got a huge community of resources out there. It can be very simple, but it can get complex. I've done e-commerce sites in WordPress. And one of the nice things about WordPress, as with all of these, they all have templates that are what we call in the web world responsive. So if you build a website for your desktop, it's going to look different on your phone or tablet. You want to make sure that it looks good on every device. So with a responsive theme, you don't have to worry, is my website going to look okay on my phone? Am I going to have to do a whole lot of customization to make it look good on a tablet? All of those themes have the responsiveness built in. That being said, it's incredibly important to test and look at your website on all of those devices, because 50% of your web traffic is going to be on a mobile phone. So it's incredibly important to make sure that your site looks good on there and works well on there. Maggie, did you want to talk about Wix a little bit, since you did the chamber site in that?
Yeah, I will preach Wix as a designer, and really that's just because Wix provides the most creative freedom. Okay, so when you have templatized designs, certain website builders will have limitations to those designs, or you'll have to have a deeper understanding of themes and how to navigate some of the back end code to change your template. Whereas Wix for me is kind of more the drag and drop approach, which I believe Weebly is. Squarespace is quite a bit. They all have an aspect of drag and drop, but Wix is a little bit more free flowing. So I use Wix for all of my sites. However, Wix is not very mobile friendly, and you really need to take the time to look at that before you launch your site, because I've seen some pretty wonky things happen on mobile. I've also used Squarespace because it does have such good mobile optimization. The thing with Squarespace is it's kind of limited, but also very trendy. Like you can choose modules, which are little sections of your site that are pre-made, and just drop those in, and you can know that they're going to work really easily. And as mentioned, they all have e-commerce platforms. It's just a matter of understanding how that works for each different site builder. Wix's, I know, is pretty similar to Squarespace. But, you know, if you use Square for your e-commerce, I know Square offers like a website builder for their people who use their point of sale. So there's a lot of options out there, but it really depends on also what your price range is, because every single one of these you do have to pay for typically. You either do an annual plan, a monthly plan. You can even buy 3 years worth if you know that you're going to use this site for a long time. But I know that all of them come with different benefits at every level. So I've listed a few of my recommended plans to start with for each of these site builders to take a look at. And I think on the resource page, I also put a link to compare them, so you can kind of see directly what each one does differently than the other.
And I was going to mention with WordPress, if you really want to go rogue, you can just get the WordPress software and put it on a host, on a website host, and do it yourself, and you don't have to pay anything. But with the paid plans, I think you can get some tech support too through WordPress with that. But like I said, it's got a huge community. If you are looking for an answer to a question, how do I do this? You'll most likely be able to find it with a little digging.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if we touched on this, but WordPress is kind of the go-to for developers too. So if you are calling a developer for any reason, almost always, I mean, in my experience, it's always WordPress is like the go-to. There's just a lot of flexibility that developers really understand because of the history of the site. Whereas a lot of these other platforms haven't been around for as long. With that, I think we can talk a little bit about fonts and colors, which is obviously a little difficult if you don't come from a design background, but there's a few rules of thumb. For me, identifying the differences in the different type you have on your website is a huge part of the visual components on your site. I always like to think of half height as my rule. So if I have a header, my subheader is half the height of that, and then my paragraph or my body copy is half the height of that. That does not mean if you choose 50-point font to choose 25 point as the subheader from that, because the point system isn't the same as the height of the text. Something to remember. When I'm choosing fonts, I also always choose 2, but I either do 1 weight of 2 separate fonts, or I do 2 weights of the same font. And a weight is the boldness of a font. And that can make a huge difference in your accessibility, which is how clearly people can see. People of all different backgrounds can like interact with your site. Accessibility also comes with color choice. So black on white, highly accessible. Dark gray on black, not very accessible, hard to read. There's ways you can check your work on that to see. You'd be surprised. There's a lot of contrast that you think is accessible that isn't. And I think about that a lot. I'm choosing a color and I'll be like, dang, it's not high enough contrast with black. In fact, I don't even think this one right here is probably very accessible, but something to consider with color and weight of your fonts. I often go to sans serif fonts first, which is what you're seeing here. They don't have any tails or ligatures on them. That's just a little bit more of a modern thing. If you're looking for a classic site, use a serif font, just use it wisely. And then again, going back to color, you're going to want to establish different colors for different sections of text. And when I say sections of text, there's a structure to your text that has a hierarchy, just like any Word document you'd make or any presentation you'd make. In the back end, we have little assignments for these. They're called like the H1, H2, P1, P2. There's a ton of acronyms, and it shouldn't scare you. It's just how we identify one style of type to be read across the whole site. So in almost every web builder, you'll be able to assign what your header is, and it'll be the same across the whole site. Now, there's a few exceptions. I know Wix will let you change it and make it custom, but then, you know, it'll tell you, hey, this doesn't match your theme, because consistency is really key. So if you assign all of these, and again, they're about half the height all the way down, your site's going to be super consistent across the board. Okay.
There's some links included in the resources for free fonts on Google. And also if you're getting a theme with one of your web builder, with one of the web builders, those will also come with fonts.
Yeah, fonts are endless too. I mean, there's a lot of free fonts. I always turn to Google to find something similar to like a fancy font most often.
Yeah.
Well, Google fonts almost always will work on any website, right? So any device too. So if you use a Google font, you know that it's going to work on every device. If you use another free font, you don't know. It could auto change itself to something else.
This is true.
Yeah. So Google fonts, good way to pick for web. Color, now go back and read this. It's kind of interesting, but I like to choose my colors in a particular way. This will call back to your brand, but if you're like kind of in the phase where you're choosing colors for both your brand and your website and trying to decide what you want, I start with this system here. I'm just going to show you. So in step 1, I choose a cool color, which are blues, greens, and purples. A warm color, which are oranges, reds, yellows. A light color and a dark color. Your light color could be a cool or a warm color. Now, in this example, I used kind of a white and a black, but the pro tip I listed here is not to use straight black or straight white. They're harsh on the eyes. So using something a little off white, a little off black, I chose my 2 main colors here. Then in step 2, what I did is I added the tint and the shade of those 2 colors, which will diversify kind of the palette that I can use on my site. And then in step 3, I changed the scale of each circle here to represent how much I'm going to use it on my site. So this little brown color, I really don't like. So I made that really small. I'm going to rarely, if ever, use it. The lightest blue is a super good backdrop color. So I made that really large. And I really like this kind of salmon color, right? So I changed the scale so that visually I can see what is more prominent. And what that ends up looking like is something like this. So my background colors are light. There's not a ton of contrast between these 2 colors, but they're still interesting. And I always do the inverse. So if you have this, in this case, the blue background with the salmon color on top, I inverse it. You could even inverse it with the darkest color. So in this case, I could inverse it with this dark blue or even the black. But overall, in this case, I felt like the lighter tone felt more welcoming. If I used black backdrop, it would not. And I have a good example of that, which is my own business, which uses all black all the time. So Treedome is my studio, and we only use black and white. And even though we're a creative studio, we let visuals like video and photo kind of speak for the color. Everything else on our site is black and white. Black in this case is our background, and it has an entirely different vibe than what a white background has, like what we're using on this example site. And it's just something to consider when you're choosing those colors. How do your colors reflect your brand? And when you use them, are you primarily using the lightest shade as your background or your darkest shade as your background? So colors, difficult. You can find a ton of pre-existing color palettes on Pinterest and when you just Google image search, or you can take from real life, to have a picture and then choose some colors from that. But overall, web colors, they are in what we call hex codes most often, or RGB. And so there's a way to translate colors from other systems into web. So when you're choosing your colors, if you choose something that's in a print booklet, it might not be the same online. Good thing is online, what you see is what you get. So what I'm seeing right now is exactly what I'm going to see on everyone else's computer for the most part. In print, that's not the case. But so when you're picking your colors for your brand, just remember, if you put a color in a print booklet, it may not be the same on your website if you use the exact same color. That's all I got to say about color, but it's my favorite thing.
All right. So now we're on to step 5, create your menu and pages. So you have your content, you have that distilled down into your categories, you have your colors chosen, and now you get to be able to actually build the website. Your website is going to be divided into 3 main sections. Your header, which is going to be where your menu usually is, and also your logo. So even if we go back to the page layouts, Maggie can point to where those are. So the header is at the very top there. Yep. And then usually in the space below is a photograph or some kind of visual with text. And then in that example she's on right now, it looks like there's a button in there, and that would be what we call a call to action. It gets your users engaged, it gets them doing something. Call to action could be learn more, discover us, contact us, or a mailing list sign up is another example of a call to action. But that area and then the area below it would be considered the body of your document. And then at the very bottom, we have the footer. And the footer typically contains links such as contact, your address, if you wanted to put that up there, your name. You can have terms and conditions, a privacy policy if you want. On the Treedome site, you saw that there was an email sign up at the very bottom of the page. And that's on, I'm guessing that's on every page. So that's persistent across the entire site. The top part, the very top part of your page, the header with the menu and the footer, those are persistent throughout all your sites. So your page body might look different on different pages, but the header and the footer are generally going to stay the same. And we can jump back. Yeah. Okay. So scroll back down.
Yeah. Okay.
And on to step 6, start placing content and images. And that's where your wireframes are going to come in handy. And this is a time for you to start getting your photos together. Maybe have someone take photographs for you if you don't feel very confident in your own abilities, and getting all of your visual graphics together too, illustrations, packaging examples, whatever you want for your site, whether it's advertising products or, you know, maybe you're developing a website and you have an About Us page that has your team, because maybe you're working with 3 people, so you'd want photos of them as well. Down to 7 is going to be your user testing. So you'll want to test your site out with people that you trust. Usually you can send somebody a private link. This is before you publish your website. We refer to this as a staging site, and it's not publicly available. It's not usually indexed by a search engine quite yet, but it's a private area where you can send that to people to get their feedback. So does the website feel intuitive? Are the visitors able to find what they're looking for? You may want to send them a list of tasks, maybe 5 things. Can you find the About page? Can you sign up successfully for email? And have them walk through those steps so that they're actually able to accomplish what you want your website to accomplish. Does the most important information come across first? Or is there information in there that's not really top level kind of information for, say, your homepage? How appropriate the website's overall feel and tone is. You may have something in there that you think conveys the message that your brand wants to convey, but perhaps your website visitor doesn't quite get that. Ask them to navigate to a specific area that might be harder to find, and then ask them for specific feedback. Sometimes when you're doing usability testing or you're testing your site with users, you can sit with them and watch them, and see, where are they clicking to find these things I'm asking them to find? They may be using your site in a totally different way than what you intended. You can take some notes on that and change what needs to be changed. And then lastly, you want to make sure that all the links are correct, all your pages are functional. Any integrations that you have, like a contact us or a mailing list, that those are functional. And that's important. And you also want to have them not only tested on a desktop, but on a phone or a tablet, because they might not be able to find those things on a phone if something is buried, say on the homepage.
Also, I get this question a lot, and I'm sure you do too, like how does scrolling affect the user experience, and how much do you want them to scroll versus not? And some people just have different preferences. So I've worked with clients who want the main page of their website to be like a stopping point. You don't scroll anywhere and you just click into other areas. Other people want everything they have to say scrollable. And that's where anchor points or different markers come in, so that you can still have people get quick access to like drag to a certain part. But to me, that's kind of personal taste. I personally like something in the middle, not too much scrolling, not too little. But on mobile, you'll find that very quickly the scrolling becomes excessive. And so that's something to consider when you're looking at mobile and tablet. Is my scrolling like just taking forever to get to the footer?
Yep, exactly. And then the last step, or it could even be the first step, is to purchase your domain name. There are some resources that are included at the end on places where you can get your domain. You can also buy them directly through any of the website builders that were provided earlier: Wix, Squarespace, WordPress, and Weebly. but if you wanted to go outside of those and purchase your own, GoDaddy is a good place. Hover. It's also important to consider where you're going to host your website. If you're going to take, I think Wix, Weebly, and Squarespace have to be hosted on those sites. Am I correct in that, Maggie?
Not necessarily. I think
You can. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, like Wix, you can take it and move it somewhere else. So I also included some hosting companies if you wanted to go that route. And like, WordPress can be hosted on WordPress, or it can, you can take it and move it somewhere else.
How much would you say like domains usually cost?
They cost about anywhere from like $8 to $13, I think. I just bought a couple and they were $13 a piece for 1 year. Sometimes you get a discount if you do more than 1 year. One thing that I do want to say, never let your domain expire unless you're absolutely sure that you don't want it, because as soon as it expires, a squatter will pick it up and sit on it, and it'll be virtually impossible to get it back. I've had that happen with a couple of domains.
Yeah, people buy domains, right? And just like they know they're going to be valuable. So
yeah, they'll just grab them, even if they don't know if it's going to be valuable, they'll just get them because they'll figure somebody might want to buy it eventually. And then they can also just, post whatever on there. And yeah, so just be very mindful about keeping an eye on your domain and not letting it expire. I learned that the hard way this week.
do you have anything about security with that too? I was just on the phone with a friend whose entire website that I actually helped build was stolen by an overseas person that copied the whole site, and there's nothing they can do with it except for like legal action. And like sometimes that comes down to the domain purchasing, sometimes it comes down to your web host. But yeah.
Yeah, I have not had a website stolen, but I've heard of that, and a lot of squatters are overseas, so it's virtually impossible to, even pursuing legal action. It's expensive. I know, for example, like Hover, if your domain expires, they kind of put it into a category for 70 days and you can still recover it during that time. After that, it's released back into the wild and anybody can pick it up.
And I know you mentioned this could be step one also, and I agree, it can be, especially if you know the name of your business. So like I just grabbed an Instagram handle that I thought could potentially be the name of my business. And with social media, that's something you want to kind of think about at the same time as purchasing your domain. So for me, like when I'm promoting myself, I have a website called Mags Designs, but my Instagram handle, that was not available to me. And so I had to like come up with some weird type instances to make an Instagram handle that was close to my domain name. But it can get tricky. So it's worth investigating and searching some options. So, if your Facebook, your Instagram, your LinkedIn, if everything can match, that's like the best case scenario. So Treedome, everything Treedome has an MN like Minnesota at the end of it. And that was the way that we were able to make everything consistent across the board. So just something to think about, especially if you're going to be promoting on social media.
Yes, exactly. That's ideal to have everything match across all of the social media platforms and your domain name, because it's going to increase your chances of being discovered, by a visitor. If you have the same name across all, it'll increase your search engine results. But, tagging an MN to the end of a domain, that's an easy workaround if you're not able to get the one that you want. I think for no name, we tag bar, no name bar Winona. Because, that's a pretty, unique URL. There are also other options too. There's .store, .co, if you don't want to go the .com route or the .net route.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yep.
Another thing, just if you're thinking about a business name too, do your research in advance. Make sure no one else has it. Even if the domain's available and the Instagram handle's available, there could still be a company that has something similar to you out there. And so you want to search the trademark, like World Trademark Association, basically, to see like if there's something that's similar to what you're doing under the same name. So I know that we're registered with them so that no one can take our stuff, even though we've seen things that are close. No one's ever taken our stuff.
Yeah, that's another good point too. When you're registering a domain name, you may want to do a couple of extra registrations just in case somebody misspells it, or little variations on it. If somebody, I don't know, put the Treedome or, stuff like that. Things that you're not going to use, but domains that you own, so that nobody can grab that and swipe it from under you. And then you can also just have those domains redirect to your actual site.
Mm-hmm. And redirects are really important too. That's something from the back end. Like if you click a certain link, it's going to go to you, not somebody else.
Yep.
I guess I don't really know how to explain it, but it's just kind of a safety net.
If you're doing, this is kind of off topic, but if you're doing like a website refresh and the URLs are going to change, you're going to want to make sure that all of those old URLs are covered and redirect to the appropriate place on the new website. So maybe the page name changed. Instead of About Us, now it's called About. You're going to want to make sure that if somebody types in About Us or hits an old search engine link or an old link, it's going to point them into the right place.
Yeah, I actually did have an example of that, which was Ramsey County, who ended up changing a few things to get to certain areas. And so now if you Google like Ramsey County, it all goes to the right place, which is good. But they had separate programs, and some of the names of the separate programs were really random. And so they wanted something concise. And so the random names are now pointing to the correct place. Yeah.
And sometimes, like it takes a long time for things to update sometimes. So you just want to make sure that people are getting to where you want them to go.
Mm-hmm. Like launch date, when you put it in the system, doesn't always mean automatically too. I mean,
Right.
depending on what you're doing with your URLs and stuff, or your domains and stuff, like it can take a day or two or 7 days or whatever. I just switched my like Mags Designs domain from Squarespace to Wix, and it's like that's going to take 7 to 10 business days. So I had to make sure my new website was ready to go, and that when it's updated, like it'll be pretty seamless, but I don't actually know when it's going to happen.
Yeah, that's in the web design world, or in the web development world, that's called propagation. So it just takes a little bit of time for it to actually get live. Just because it may be live on the host, it takes a while for it to update across the whole internet.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And now all's this today to say we don't want to like scare you, but we're here to help you.
These are all very manageable things.
Yeah. Get a designer's opinion. We already talked about this. Like you want all these things to look cohesive to the rest of your material. And that's something most designers can do, but just be clear about what you want. Like I can do product design and web design. Some people can only do one or the other. And, making sure that everything matches across the board can happen internally. So when you are done making your website or somebody else is done making your website for you, you want to make sure the person managing it knows what to do and is experienced in some way or taught how to do it. So in some cases, the person who created your website, you could hire them to manage it forever. That could be a developer or a designer. Or you could say, all right, I want my website designed by a designer and a developer, and I want to hand it off to my team so that they can make the updates. You just want to be clear about the fact that your team is now taking over the website, and they're going to need to be taught how to make changes. So there's instances where you lose contact information, and like if a website's 10 years old and we don't know how to track stuff down, it can get difficult. And so you want to have a chain of command, people who understand what is going into your website and how to use it. Now, when to talk to a developer is a different question, and it kind of depends on how detailed your work is. And I just want to point out that most designers can create a site in a web builder, but they are not developers. Most developers, almost always, are not designers. And that's a clear distinction, because when you hire a developer, you should really not depend on them to design your site in a graphic way or whatever, unless you know that that's something that they do. Some developers get mock-ups from designers and that's it. They just copy what they see. And I've worked with people who are developers and designers, so they understand what I'm trying to say. But I've also worked with developers who just copy my images and they say, oh, I know exactly what you mean, or they ask me questions. And so if you're creating your site on your own, just make sure that everyone involved knows how to use it in case you can't do it anymore.
Yes, agreed. I would just want to add that when you need a web developer, one of the nice things about these web builders is that if you don't want to even deal with it, you can have a developer put together a website, or have a designer put together a website, and then they can just walk you through what you need to do to maintain it, so that you may never need to contact them again. But you may want to reach out to a developer if you're having issues putting together anything that's going to require like a mailing list, or website updates that you don't want to handle. You know, maybe you're too busy. Maybe you want to add more content. Maybe you want to add another feature, and you just don't feel comfortable. That's when you can contact a developer. You can also contact the developer, even though this is a little outside of the strictly development aspect. If you want to increase your search engine results, there's actually people that do that for a living, called SEO specialists, search engine optimization specialists. And that's actually how people find your website. You build this beautiful website, and now how do people find it? There are certain things that you can do in the code that will increase your chances of turning up higher in a Google search. Ideally, number one, when somebody wants to find your site, and you can do things, very easy things like tags and keywords. Having a really good descriptive name for the site and your pages is another thing that's going to increase your chances of getting good Google results. And there is a link in the resources to how to get started with that. Don't overlook the SEO aspect of your website, because that's where you're going to get your traffic, is when people Google you.
Another thing to think about is when you share your link, does an image, so this happens a lot on Facebook, when you share a link to your site, does an image show up that you want to show up, or does something that looks crappy show up? And that's something that you control. So like Wix is a good example. In the settings, there's a place for you to import an image. If you were going to share the What We Do page, you can put an image in associated with that page. So when you share the link, it shows up. And there's just little things you want to look for. So every time people look for your site, it's in the right spot and it looks good. And that's why we made 1 billion resources for you. So I'm going to get there.
I did promise that we would take a look at the chamber sites, and
Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to point out a couple of things. So on this old site, they have this big blue and green graphic that's taking up a lot of real estate space, but is not adding any value other than a graphic. That what we call that when you land on a page, it's from journalism above the fold. So the information that's above the fold here is not really that helpful, aside from just being a collection of links. If you go to the new site that Maggie did, you have some good information, good promotional copy that tells you, what they do, a call to action to become a member, another one to explain what they do. The navigation is not overwhelming. It's nice and pared down compared to the old site where it was very cluttered and lots of links to read. People don't spend a whole lot of time reading on the web unless you're specifically looking for something to read. And they also tend to get pretty impatient if they can't find what they're looking for. On this site, the information is laid out. Things are easy to find. And there's a lot of good information that's right up front in above the fold, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this took a lot of work, but we decided like every time there's a new announcement, it's going to be in the news section, and that's where all of the new information is going to show up, and we're going to have a long history of that. We know that they have a lot of events, and so we made a calendar that's really visually representing that in an easy way. I think the old site did have a calendar, but there was nothing on it, and it was small and didn't necessarily cover what was needed. The other thing was the old website had this newsletter page where every single newsletter, like for the last 5 years, was listed. Okay, it doesn't even want to load, so that's not a good sign either. Yeah, and so there's just, look at all these files. These are files stored on the website, and that is just cluttering everything. I mean, it's
I have no idea what any of these newsletters contain.
mm-hmm.
I wouldn't even know where to start.
Exactly. And so like in that scenario in the news site, when you go to news, so all of the newsletters that are relevant are going to show up at the bottom of every section. So these are the most recent ones. We can see past newsletters if we want to, but we're only going to have a few. We're going to have the last year, not like 500. So there's little integrations you can do to kind of keep your content minimalized or hidden if you need to. In this case, like some of the board members want to see certain things like the newsletter from the past, even though the public doesn't. I know another thing on this site is the member login, having a quick link for people who are members. Another thing about this site is we needed to take new photos of the staff. So on the old website, I don't even know where to find the staff. Here they are. They're under About the Chamber. These are the photos, and every person.
Oh, yeah, there's no names, or I don't know who's who.
Yeah, and then there's this bar on the side, and oh, okay, now everyone has their own section. And so for that, we made it really concise. So everyone has their bio when you hover. But we don't need to know a ton. We need to know their contact information and what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing for the committees. We just need to know briefly what they do and how to contact them. We don't need to know what their business plan and budget is. And that's because as much as this site is for members, it's also for the public and people who want to be members. And so the audience here is really, really broad, which is why this site has to be really approachable and versatile, but it also needs to have things that members care about that are easy to find, if that makes sense. So this was a long process. A lot of information was cut. In fact, almost, I would say 80% of the content from the previous site was eliminated. And that's just how much work it needed. When you're starting from scratch, you may struggle to find, what you need, but you may struggle to find enough information. But always just write it all out, make the sitemap,
I wanted to point out some of the resources that are not self-explanatory that I added, and this is probably a little bit beyond what we're, just getting started in web design, if you're just getting started. But as you dig deeper into it, you can find out more information that's going to be useful to you. For example, the web design standards. Now that is a link to w3c.org, and they're the organization that comes up with all of the standards for web development. What the latest updates on what is standardized practice and style sheets, HTML, whatnot. They also have an excellent section on accessibility. So you can reach visitors that are vision impaired or hearing impaired if they're using screen readers or stuff like that. If you find that you want to start digging into code, I have a link there to a free code text editor that's actually really good, called Sublime Text. And then I also added a couple of links, one to the Google Analytics, which is a neat little tag that you can put in your website so that you can track what your visitors are exploring, how long they stay on the site. It doesn't give any personalized information. It just tells you, what pages are they leaving? How long do they stay on your site? How many people are coming in through mobile? How many are coming in through tablet or a desktop? So you can get an idea of how visitors are using your site. And then some link there for search engine optimization and how to improve. And there's a nice little beginner SEO link there from Google.
Yeah, absolutely. I added a few articles if you want to read a little bit more about like what's trending or what are some good guidelines that are just kind of standard. I really love the AIGA Ion design. That's the wrong link, but I'll change it. When you create a site in one day, you don't check all your links, I guess. But, I like to follow trends. I like to be on Pinterest a lot. They're good places to be. So I think that's kind of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add. If, my email is on there, if anybody wants to reach out to me, I can try to answer any questions that you have about what we've covered today. And if you need some consultation, I can help you with that as well.
Yeah, that's something we're available to do. And I know with lived experience leaders, there's going to be a lot of projects that are in development. But now if anyone that's currently in the room has questions, just drop them in the chat or unmute yourself. We can answer those. Otherwise, just send us an email, whatever you're comfortable with. Nate, do you have any questions? He's not even here.
I am here. Don't doubt me. I guess first is, what would you find to be the biggest hurdle or issue that you find when you're designing a website? Like, what is something that consistently stumps you?
For me, it's photos. I hate not having photos in advance. And so I often will design like a whole site with placeholder photos or stock photos. And then like my client will be like, these are the photos and they're too low res. And when I say low res, like they show up pixelated when they're expanded to be the full width of a website. That's something to watch for. Something to hand off early. If you need to plan your photography with a professional, do it earlier. Your whole site can look entirely different based on the photography. If you're not going to have any photography at all, that's another thing. You may want icons those either need to be created by hand or downloaded, and having that conversation about what icon represents what area can be a little bit of a struggle. But for me, it's not having copy. So when you're making your sitemap and you're establishing what kind of things you want on your site, just start writing. I think you can always cut down, which brings up a good point. You can have things published on your website, or you can have aspirations for your website, right? Your website can always grow and it can always change. And I find a lot of the times, like, clients want their website to be exactly perfect and cover a ton of things right off the bat, when in reality, most of your visitors aren't going to notice if you add a section about, X, Y, or Z a month later. And if, you have aspirations for your website, like, write them down and be working towards them, but don't expect everything to be done for your launch, especially with a new business, because with a new business, the most important thing is just like launching the website, having it out there.
I'll add, that's what we call a minimum viable product, an MVP. And that's just getting it out there. It's the minimal thing, most minimal website that you can launch.
I fight about this with my family a lot. My parents own a medical clinic, and so my dad really wants to have like every medical term on the planet on the website. And I was like, you know what? We can launch this website without that, because somebody can Google what, a fractured ankle treatment is, So I just think about that a lot, and I encourage people designing websites to pare down on what they need to get it out there.
It's a scope creep that makes a website balloon up to something that then it just gets too large and you never know when it's going to finish. So just being able to kind of rein that in, maybe break it down into phases. Phase one, this launches, and then we add that in phase two.
Any other questions?
I can't think of anything else.
Thanks, Nate.
I know I'm a huge help.
No, you, so Nate gives me a lot of feedback.
Oh, I actually do have another question. If somebody were to be making their own website, how would you recommend them choosing which service to go with, whether that's Wix or Weebly or Squarespace, or like, how does one figure out what they want to use?
Yeah, and we just got a question about what about Shopify too? Another service. Cynthia, what do you think?
I think it just depends on your comfort level. I believe that you're able to get free trials with all of them. So you can just sign up for a free trial and play around with it and see if it's something that you feel comfortable working with. As Jovi asks about Shopify, and that I actually used Shopify this last summer to put up our merchandise. Very easy to use. It's, well worth the monthly fee, which I think is $29 or something. It's easily integrated into, I know it's easily integrated into WordPress. But I really have been happy with my Shopify experience, and you don't really even need any kind of web experience to be able to use that.
Yeah, that e-commerce potential really drives what site you use, I think.
It does. And you can link it up to PayPal, or people can use their credit cards on it. And there's no merchant fee on it. I think your monthly fee covers the merchant fees.
Also thinking on that, I actually have a client right now who decided to vouch not to have a website and to sell their products strictly on Facebook. And so Facebook is also an option. They have a shopping service there too that you can set up, and it's really easy to use. But just remember that if you do that, you're only getting what's possible on Facebook. Same with Instagram. I mean, if you're only selling your stuff on social media, that's totally fine, but I think it's always good to have a source to point to. Yeah. Any other questions?
Not hearing other questions and knowing it's right at 7:30, maybe I'll just pivot on back and close. So I really appreciate all of your time and energy and wisdom and expertise. I mean, sharing this for the community and for community benefit. This is really just to help folks sort of advance their visions for change, whether it's small business, nonprofit, all of the above. And that resource site is really incredible. I think so. It's in the chat, so please copy it now before you leave. But I also added it to the comment in this event page on Facebook, so you can find it there too. Or just reach out. Well, I'll also add this. There's an event page on engagementon.org that features all of these, and I'll make sure that's included there. Just a signpost, this is the very first of 8 of these workshop series, all free, open to the public. They're Thursdays at 6, and they're all sort of designed around how do you get a community project or a small business or nonprofit from point A to point B. And so in the coming weeks, actually next week, we'll be having a panel discussion around, do you actually want to start a nonprofit or small business, or do you want to go in another direction? Coming weeks, we'll be talking about how do you write a grant? How do you raise money if you have no interest in writing grants? How do you use free tools to kind of manage teams and projects? Like, how do you figure out how to build a network to get yourself some support? All kinds of good topic ideas. And those are all at engagementon.org and then also on our Facebook page. And then the last thing I'll share is just a brief feedback form. We would appreciate folks taking that on your way out. You can click through it now, just a couple of questions. It also gives us the opportunity to get your contact info for Maggie and Cynthia, if you're interested in having them reach out to you, and then you can also reach out to them through that resource site. So thank you again for your time and energy. Really appreciate you being here. Also really appreciate everybody allowing this to be recorded. We're going to be sharing this with our program and lots of other folks in the coming days. And so please come on back next Thursday at 6, and thanks for being here and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you.
So thanks everyone.